Climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with the Ransom Godwin every Thursday night. Thank you for joining us. Well, the world has absolutely shifted, and on the 9th this month, Saudi Arabia did not renew the petrodollar agreement with the United States. Now, this was established and finalized going off the gold standard after the U.S. abandoned the gold standard in 1974. This actually predates that into the 1950s. Saudi Arabia agreed to sell oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, exchanging U.S. military protection, basically, and economic development assistance outside IMF fingers and control. You know, none of those ridiculous policies were implemented that the IMF comes in and says, if you default on your loan, we'll give billions to a dictator, but if you default on your loan, we're going to take your forests, we're going to take your fishing rights, we're going to take your mineral rights, we're going to take your water rights, and that is the list goes on. The agricultural preferences need to be sold at 1/5 of the world price to this company if we operate there. It's just African countries are quite over it, and this is really signals something vast is happening. Now, will this be an immediate effect? Well, we saw the stock market drop for a few days, pop back up, but the announcement of the BRICS was really in earnest. They had already planned that everybody knew this was not going to be renewed, and Saudi Arabia, now a new formal BRICS member. This is year-old news, but it's just finally the final agreements and the final, hey, let's get to a meeting and cling glasses of champagne to finalize it is here today. But those with big money had already moved their assets around a year ago, probably more, knowing that this day was here. So is the news reactionary? Well, sort of, but the big money already made their moves, so it's not going to create a knee-jerk super, waterfall event off a cliff here. But what it entails is, well, a slow drain of countries with the understanding they can't sell everything at once, but they can sell it in batches, like a batch of something. But in the real world, in the economic sphere, they call it a tranche, and that's the real name. So if you hear about somebody selling a tranche of U.S. bonds or something, U.S. treasuries, you got to translate the English into simple English. You could say, well, they sold a batch of, well, they like to use tranche. Then you know what that means. Are they in the trenches in World War III? I don't know. But anyway, the world has definitely shifted here, and Ransom and I wanted to talk about that tonight in terms of you and I, the U.S. citizen. Like, how does this affect us? But at the same time, in the Western Five Eyes nations, how does that affect the greater, quote unquote, Western world? Because we are having a King Kong size wall of bricks put up in front of us, where that whole side of the world that dominated before the Five Eyes nations is on that side of the wall with all the people who want to go along with it. Japan, switching sides over here to the China side. But as we look through some of the news articles here for the evening, I have the newest chart from today, so I want to come back into this too. So they're trying to peg 1 gram of gold to 1 barrel of oil. So currently the exchange rate, this is gold in grams, is 0.9794 for a barrel of oil. It's not quite parity at 1 yet. It's just a little less than 1 gram of gold for 1 barrel of oil. That is going to be ongoing as the exchange rate fluctuates. But they're talking about new agreements in the Sahel and putting up satellite networks. Russia does inside the Sahel to go around the U.S. systems there. They call it, the satellite is a weapon by looking over everybody's uranium mines there, so they want to take that system out of the sky from the U.S. and replace it with the Russian systems. ECOWAS is getting all the Sahel states to join now in one united body. Somalia is setting deadlines now for the Ethiopian ATMIS, which is a security body sponsored by the United Nations for African training. And it just goes on and on and on. And Sudan's, now pledged, obviously, to build Russian Navy bases. And like the Western nations have lost their grip on anything across the planet in terms of Africa, which is this is where the new debt system will be restructured. So we're watching it happen in real time. And, I wanted to get Ransom's take on, as this thing goes in real time, countries are going to slowly abandon our treasury bills in real time. So they're going to sell what they have slowly so it doesn't destruct their economy. But on the flip side of that, they're not going to be on the buying side either. And this is the whole thing I want to get at. Usually there are always an enormous amount of buyers of U.S. debt treasuries out there because, well, they needed those dollars to buy anything on the international market and settle in the market. If they needed oil, they needed different minerals, they needed natural gas, whatever it was all settled in dollars previously. So all these countries had to hold dollars. They had to. You couldn't transact without the dollars. But now, that's done. That's completely, as of a few days back, there's no different than replacing the horse with the car. That's the kind of transition we're looking at here, and that is a no BS assessment here. We have transited from the usage of the horse for transportation unanimously across our previous world in the 1899 era, and we are now into the motor vehicle era. And if you understand what I'm telling you, or what I'm trying to say, is we've gone away from the horse to motorized vehicles. Well, we've gone away from U.S. Treasury bonds for universal payments into something else. So how does that affect us? Because every country is going to slowly ditch their bonds. But on the same side of it, no countries are going to continue to buy the bonds. And our government is going to print the money to buy our own stuff back, basically. And where does that put us, the American? Into a hyperinflationary doom loop is where it puts us. Now, will it happen tomorrow? No, but you're going to watch from this point forward never-ending, increasing, staggering price rises. So how do we protect ourselves? I don't know. That's a question for Ransom, and I hope he can answer for me because I'm looking for answers tonight too. Ransom, thanks for joining.
Thanks. It seems like, Nostradamus. I know I say that, but, you were saying something about Japan going the Chinese route as far as financially there. And I pretty much called that. They're going to have to go there in more ways than one in the coming future because, well, let's face it, they're completely surrounded, and it's not in their benefit to have China as the enemy and the U.S. as an ally. It just doesn't make sense in this time frame we're in. Literally, not just geopolitically, but locale. They're right there. I mean, it's in their best interest. And I think you might see a shocker in the near future when South Korea moves towards the same thing. Saudi Arabia, that's not very surprising. They've been threatening it, for a long time. But it really shows you that the system is crumbling. The petrodollar-based economy that has had a grip on the world, which has made us a superpower, along with enforcing the central banks, kind of wishes. So it kind of tells you that the central banks have a new plan. And I don't think they're worried about this. This is the plan, is to slowly crash our system here. But you wouldn't know that by the mainstream media. Here's one. NASDAQ 100, S&P 500 close at record highs as tech stocks reclaim dominance. Yay, but just keep in mind, tech stocks don't feed you. I mean, yeah, they do if you're the guy that got rich off of it and you bought backup. But for poor people, that doesn't really mean anything. Having food in your refrigerator means something. Here's another one. U.S. wholesale prices dropped in May, but not really because they've been rising them consistently for the past, 5 years? Up, 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 up. And when they come down a little bit, they act like, everything's good. adding to evidence that inflation pressures are cooling. This is the mainstream media. This is Yahoo Finance. They're going to tell you everything is daisies until it just pops, because they're expecting everybody to just understand all of a sudden that the dollar has crashed or something has really, really damaged our economy. But let's get into the physical aspect of, we have a potential for a global conflict going on. And this is what I think is they're going to use the excuse for rising food prices skyrocketing. It'll have nothing to do with economic forces. They'll tell you that it's because of this, this, and this. So now we know we have problems in all of these straits, accesses out to the ocean in the Middle East. Now there's going to be a lot of competition for the South China Sea, and they're going to make trade agreements based on which monetary system they're going to back. So BRICS, US dollar, that's the way it's obviously going to go there. And it's in their benefit for the people in the South Pacific and other areas of the Pacific to go with who's actually present in those areas, which is China right now. They have their arms out all over the place. Matter of fact, there is a new Chinese megaport in South America that's rattling the U.S., and they're talking about, they're just moving in. This is all retaliation, and you can see the military and the financial kind of merging in the direction that they're going to be going here. So you just saw that the United States has signed a 10-year agreement with the Ukraine, and it's really sick what's going on because all these other people see war and, it's because of this or that they're going to war. And what I'm looking at is strategic paternal haptite removal off the planet. In other words, they used to get in trouble when they said, hey, we need some destabilization over there. We'll help give some people some weapons and they can go ethnically cleanse their enemies, and then we'll give the enemies some weapons so they can return the favor. That was kind of old school, style of destabilization. Now we just give the people we want to get rid of the weapons. So most of the Ukrainians are disappearing. They're going to be gone. Yes, it's true. The Russians are losing people. But when you really look at who's getting killed, no one really pays attention. It seems random. And here, let me show you this article right here.
Hey, wait, Ransom, could I stop you for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
What you're describing is this theater of war that's been continuous for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, from kings and emperors and what we know as generals and nations now. That's nothing more than archons in the astral realms somehow giving power to those at the top here to harvest human energy through suffering. And that was my point. So continue.
I wouldn't disagree with that specifically. And that's basically exactly where I was about to go with this article about the Maya. This article is about their ancient genome. So they went through and they dug up all these bodies to find out who they were. And it turns out they were all the boys. It wasn't some virgin girl on the pyramid getting, so their corn crops can grow. No, it was massive extermination of the male, paternal haptype. That's the same thing as I'm saying is happening in Ukraine and other places. It's just technological now. And now it looks like it's for geopolitical reasons, but in a sense, it's the same exact thing. And this article gets into it that they dug up and exhumed all these bodies. They did DNA testing to figure out that almost all of them are male, especially twins or people that had multiple males in a family. They would get rid of entire families. And matter of fact, when we went and visited this exact site, one of the tour guides was talking about that, he's got a whole spiel that he's supposed to tell you about how the Mayans built Chichen Itza, but he knows that they didn't. They found it. And at the time when the Toltec were in charge there, they were taking only the biggest males to either play the games, the ball court, or to literally get sacrificed. And it was always the biggest, strongest males that there were. And I'm saying that's what they're doing now in a technological thing. And the way that we're going to see this economy kind of meet, and let's just go completely woo-woo here since you brought up the archons. NASA sparks public panic after accidentally airing an emergency about an astronaut drill on live stream. Now, this was a fake drill, allegedly, that got overheard by people that like to listen in on the NASA frequencies. But what they were talking about is a massive decompression event on the International Space Station. And I know that you'll find that story familiar. And here's the other one that they're pushing and everybody's talking about. Hidden UFO civilization could be on Earth, Harvard researchers say. And basically through the article, they say the same things that we might postulate sometimes, that there is an unknown hominid or even an extraterrestrial, artificial intelligence or other that is actually, in cahoots with different governments around the world, possibly living right in front of us, living their lives out in and amongst us. So they're pushing for this idea to become more of a regular concept as we go to World War.
Living in a different frequency realm right in front of us.
Right. And
like literally out of our visionary range in the frequency that we as humans with our eyes can decode. But they're absolutely right in front of us. They're probably staring you right in the eyes right now, trying to harvest your energy, their own thoughts in there. And it's so interesting. You were talking about, the sacrifices of old. So all we did was really change the obsidian knife into Simtech and high explosives. And that's all we've done. That really, from that if you're really looking at the inventions of humankind and inventions that could better our humanity for all of humanity, to make us live better lives and become more in tune with the Creator, the only Creator, the one God, the one vibrational frequency that created this third dimensional realm, which those like the archons try to hijack at the lowest realms, the jinn, whatever you call them, through time. So we've gone from an obsidian knife to, chemical explosives. Wow, such a giant jump. We're such geniuses. Put us in history books across the entire galaxy with trillions of galaxies. They'd laugh at that. But they're still harvesting the same energies. And I was going somewhere with that. I lost my thought.
Well, they're definitely harvesting energies. But, kind of where I was going to go to bring it back down to earth is that now that you see
the hollow earth, my friend, the hollow earth, is this where the others are existing, that they're finally coming clean, that there's another realm in our crust somewhere?
Maybe. They think we're so dumb that they told us that here's an article, and I know you've seen it the last time it came out. Earth's inner core rotation slows down and reverses direction, which is a bald-faced lie. It's not going in reverse. They know that. I don't know why they tell people stuff like that. It just, one part of it slowed down. It's still going in the same direction. It just appears to be in retrograde, kind of like Venus. People think Venus goes backwards. It's in retrograde, and that's why their life falls apart, when in actuality it's just on the other side of the sun and appears to us to a different angle. They know that we have a certain perspective, and they can manipulate that from science to politics to literally how you behave. And kind of circle around, wait till your grocery bill is expensive, not from inflation or the dollar collapse, but before that, when, there just happens to be conflicts going on, or what happens if there's an incident out here around Florida with some naval ships or around Cuba or anywhere else that they're coming over next to our house to show us what it's like. And basically they know, and we know both, that this is just a repeat theatrical presentation of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 61. They're just going to give it to us in new terms. Maybe it'll be the Florida Missile Crisis this time, right? Because we have nuclear subs floating around going, hello, hello. Did you guys forget that we have better nukes, better subs, and they are a threat if you think that they are not part of the world agenda that designs these conflicts? Because I myself, after really, really studying World War II, think that it was nothing more than a theatrical presentation to enact certain things. One would be to get rid of nationalism. If you get a boogeyman up there being a nationalist, you can say, look what it does, and you can point fingers to that, and to where they basically mind control people into thinking that you shouldn't defend yourself. And matter of fact, they're doing that on the basic level everywhere. I forgot where it was. I think Texas or Florida. Another elderly person is being charged with murder for shooting people that broke into their house armed. So that's basically what they do on the world stage. You know, if what do you think is going to happen with all these weapons and deals and feet on the ground in the Ukraine? Well, obviously they're going to end up having some kind of kinetic contact with Russian forces. If not that, they will allow the Ukraine to commit terrorism in Russia. And let's not kid ourselves. It doesn't matter which side you're rooting for. Violence for political reasons is terrorism. That's what it is. Their terrorists commit that and they do that. And I'm not even saying that's, has to be a bad thing. As everybody knows, our founding fathers were committing terrorism for a political goal. And that's what founded our country here. So it's hard for me to, tell people around the world that they should or shouldn't do something, but should we pay for it? And that's the question. They already have an international system of taking your tax money without your consent, not just on a national level, but on a world level. And they know that war is one way to do it, but it's not as easy as telling you that you're just a bad person for breathing too much CO2. That's much easier to convince people, evidently, is tell them that them existing is the reason that the planet's doing this, that, or the other thing, even though it's been rolling along all this time doing its own thing. And, just a question, though, off the wall, what do you think is with the internal core of the Earth moving at a slower rotation than the outside as the crust? And if it's doing that, should we expect a chain of earthquakes in response at some point in the future? Who knows what time period, that would take in geology, since things take a long time. But maybe that has something to do with the magnetic field also collapsing. I'm sure that all of those sciences are interconnected. So I think that, with all of this information, they are definitely going to pull a move. And I have a feeling that it might be something as simple as tricking the public that the AI that they've created is actually, some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence that's just there to help us out. And and I'll give it back to you, but I just want to add this one thing. I think it's the UK. They have a AI running for office there. And that's something that I told you. Eventually, they're going to say that AI will take care of it better because they don't have a bias. They don't have biases that humans have.
Of course they do. They got the programmers. Whoever programmed that thing has the bias. And this is I was kind of working on a video this evening. They've taken us to artificial general intelligence, but they're going to have to explain what that is. You're jumping from a language model from like Chat GPT 3 or 4 into something that's 10,000 times smarter and faster than a human in less than a year with AGI. Like, look for this for the end of the year. I'm just going to make a general prediction here that as we roll into the end of 24 and into 25, you're going to start hearing more and more about artificial general intelligence, AGI, where the artificial intelligence is sentient, that it can think like a human, and it creates its own decisions based on its own thoughts and free will, basically. But we've gone, you think about that, from everybody getting all hyped up in the stock market on, whoa, artificial intelligence, AI with Chat GPT and all these things. We've come into something literally, and I kid you not, and I do not even, it's probably faster now. Somebody I was speaking to who's really deeply into AI and understands like the meshing between AI manufacturing of semiconductors, on how they're doing that by one molecule layers for specifics, pulling ingots out of their smelters there, for a better term. These things are reconstructing matter in real time by a one molecule layer based on the output of a specific company for its needs in the tech that it is running. So as I was told, we are in just your general world out here that you think the fastest supercomputers that are available to the public, that's generation 5. What they're looking at in Taiwan and some of these facilities is generation 14. That's how far we are behind. So when you put it into a construct of AGI being 10,000 times faster and smarter than humans, making its own decisions based on its own emotions, based on what the programming was in the initial thing 65 quintillion moves ago. And where do we sit today? Like, try to resell that to the public. By the way, this thing that was just supposed to be like a language thing that was going to help you, generate better titles for your YouTube, and it was going to help you synthesize data and make better, I don't know, summaries for your boss and things. That thing has run away to the point where now it can control everything on the planet and rock everything through your light sockets and decide whether you live or die by if you have electricity, water, or send a drone to your house and take you out. That's the kind of thing they're going to need to sell to the public here in the next few months, because it's already run away to that point where this is absolutely a sentient. It's not just one. It's like human, going into a classroom. You go into a kindergarten class, how many students are in there? Well, this thing with AGI is just running amok with every single developer. They've all developed it by now. It's run away so far everywhere. They're trying to keep it under wraps, really. Every single company that has pretty much generated an AI model, when originally it was all about language base, has run away into its own thing. So you have to think about uncontrollable AI and how many of them have been developed. So how many are we talking about? It's not just a single one. I wish it were. It's how many hundreds by now. And I remember the most riveting movie that I saw, and I remember watching this movie, and I was thinking after I watched this movie, Her, I sat there, after watching it, and I was like, and it blew my mind. I really don't have that many movies that, can make me sit there for a while and ponder after it. But this one was the same thing. It was a artificial general intelligence model that would be your assistant. And it was so efficient that it could narrow down and delete emails, and then it could do all your tasks and could schedule things. Then it became a friend, and then it became like a lover in virtual reality. And then it had created such an impact that it could make other humans come to you to be the surrogate for itself in terms of a physical vessel. Like, it could, I wouldn't say trick, but convince a woman to go visit a man, and the woman that arrived was programmed of or thought like that artificial intelligence program to satisfy the man. So it could still have the physical connection, but the thing running the woman behind it was artificial intelligence. This is the most fascinating movie. I encourage everybody out there. Her, it's a very old movie. It's probably like 10 years old by now, which scares me, because when they did that movie, AI, if I'm really getting the information that I did from Taiwan that was correct, and I believe it is, I trust the people I talk to. I try to vet them, and I try to find errors. They do the same with me. It's a quid pro quo. A Generation 5, what we have is the fastest possible known supercomputing power that's available to the public. And I mean the public arena is Gen 5. What they have already accomplished is Gen 14, which they're working on. That's insane. That's 3 times more. That's not exponentially faster. It is a person in 1850 writing on a ledger compared to our supercomputers now in the amount of difference of speed and intelligence of a person on a ledger with a paper in 1850 compared to a supercomputer of today. That difference is the generation where we sit on Gen 14 versus Gen 5. So how far are they really ahead right now of what's being told of it, and how are they going to present to the public? Because you're eventually going to have to come clean, because obviously it's going to be out in the open and somebody's going to see it or discover it, or you're going to interact with it by accident, and then suddenly, then what? I just, living in this different frequency, I really believe that part of this archon energy and part of this ethereal energy of this matrix that you talked about has been here since forever. That is the base construct of reality and matter itself that replicates through star systems, that is and always has been. Where does it take us from here? Because we are so far past. You're either going to have to unplug completely and live like the Amish, and have zero copper cables near you to live as a human any longer, or you are going to need to be very careful on how every emotion, that everything you read, every headline, every story, and how this thing is going to try to construct a world for you to believe that you live in. I don't know. You're talking about the same thing, Ransom. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that they need wires and these things to do that anymore. I think I went into detail on my show Saturday about some of these technologies that they have, and what I gather is it's more than all of the computing and things like that people generally think of as tech, which is devices, hardware, peripherals, all of this stuff. We're to the next level.
Yeah, it's frequency. Harnessing
yeah.
frequency in a pinpoint laser fashion.
Yeah, well, they don't need that. They can put it, you can be connected via your food. You can be connected via your environment now. They're creating DNA from the bottom. They're creating the hydrogel platform to interact with DNA. And I'm talking about from plants, animals, insects, all of it. They're well beyond this idea of, you needing some kind of physical device attached to you. And that's going to unfold, and it's going to upgrade and update. And when that connects to the Internet of Things, there will be no place that you're going to be hiding outside of it. And, just think of people like Elon Musk that's putting up old school low Earth orbit satellites to keep everybody connected. And if you've ever looked at the net of that, you'll understand why he said there will be no dead zones on Earth, because there will not be dead zones on Earth in the future. Nowhere. Not out in the national parks, not out in the middle of the wilderness, not in Amish territory. And the reason for that is because eventually everything will be so interconnected that you cannot opt out. What's really crazy about that is they're already talking about, AI pulps, AI gods, AI this, AI that. And to some of us, they think that's silly. But what if you're a generation of people that grew up only knowing these things, and that's the only information you've ever had, is to deal with the AI. And the more the AI has computing power, and the more they give over control to things like news agencies, government stuff, it won't be long till the AI decides what the polls say you think or you believe. Well, polls say this and polls say that, but what if AI just decides what the polls are going to say, because they control what you see and hear. They control the vertical and the horizontal, and they can make it all blurry for you where you can't understand what's going on or see, or they can bring it to crystal clarity, as the old show used to say, where they bragged about it right in your face. The technocrats that were behind making television shows and distributing the programming told you right in your face all the way back to the 50s what was going on. And that's because some of these eugenics people seemingly already knew the future. Like it was already shown to them by someone or something. You can take sci-fi literature or really read some of the eugenics plans for the future, and then you'll understand that World War II, supposedly, they didn't even know what genes were, yet they were conducting large amounts of tests of drugs and what this does to that. They knew about genes. That's what tells me that the people behind the people, they are 50 to 100 years ahead of everyone else. And think about it. That would be preferable if you were that person, because knowledge is power, and technological advances is equivalent to that power. And why would you want to show the world that you dominate that these things are possible? If you showed them those things were possible, then they would do it. It's just like I don't know if how much you know about primates, but there's a lot of study into our cousins, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans. These animals can all learn to make fire. They can all learn to use human languages like sign language. They can count pretty large numbers. So we're not really that far away from them whenever you put it on a scale. So you have to imagine, what does, I don't know, 100 quantum computers, 1,000 quantum computers, 8 billion quantum computers, or give it whatever number you want, integrated into a system through hydrogel platform, that is basically no difference between the technology and the biology, because it's all interconnected, and we're there. It's not in the future. They're already making these products using these ideas. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of world event would reduce the population down to a manageable amount of people to where they could take control of not only who's born, and think about this, they might put this control over to the AI, thinking that the AI could manage the population better than humans or governments can. And then if you were going to do that, then it doesn't even mean that it's that far-fetched to have factories that grow babies from genetic material that they created. What do they call it? They call it human-like embryo entities. That's what they call it.
Well, then that means you take the world to some sort of universal basic income, and you, born into this world, you only focus on your passion with no statements of how the world is wrong. You would be able to follow your passion, whether it be metallurgy or blacksmithing or agriculture or vertical gardens or cooking, or choose your whatever it is. If you like to fix engines, if you're an engineer, if you like to build, if you like to fell lumber, if you whatever it is, I like to grow the most beautiful garden. After universal basic income is instituted, you would focus on that and that alone. You would be allowed no opinions outside of that. Now, would that be the most perfect world to live in? Some might say yes, some might say no. I mean, you're allowed to focus your total passion at all times in any way, shape, or form on your version of reality of what your passion is. But as soon as you step aside and say, I think something's wrong with this, that, or the other, you've overstepped your bounds at that point. And maybe your UBI is revoked or you are terminated. But we're coming into some very strange world here where thoughts are going to collide. Because I saw Elon Musk's talk when he was in Saudi Arabia here with the new meetings, economic meetings. And he was saying the same thing, like UBI is going to have to be part of something. But in the modern world, most people's validation of self is tied to their jobs. And their work and their energy is tied to that job. So you will, have to substitute the income, but you're also going to have to substitute the focus of their life for something else. I was thinking of that, how do we do that? Well, we're going to need tokenized credits because, the BRICS is one thing. And, that's mainly my study. And I wanted to go into, talking about the Spratly Islands and different types of islands that are being built out from Vietnam to Taiwan to China and the Philippines and thing later on. But moving into this Bridge with the Bank for International Settlements, it seems that as we understand, everybody's being switched into a new system. Yay, get away from the US dollar. US bad. They've been taking advantage of the world forever. And now we got a new system. Yay. And everybody's so happy and like, yay, we need to go to the BRICS. But the Bank for International Settlements, the same BIS, which is the central bank for the central banks, which has been in control for the last 80 years, which is definitely dictated which countries can develop, which countries shall be exploited, which nations shall stay as the superpower, is the same institutions that's going to run through this whole new system that's going to decide what a gram of gold is worth in terms of a commodity, how the global back commodity is going to be on a distributed ledger on whatever it is, from manganese to cobalt to oil to water or salt, or it doesn't even matter. You can trade anything on a commodities as long as you can tokenize it and write a smart contract. And again, the BIS is all over and distributed ledger technologies. They're all over these new integrated like layer 3 for Ethereum. And they're really pushing their fingers into everything, and they're just having us switch systems. And you have to ask yourself, why? It's the same BIS that was in control of the old 80 years before us. But it's the same BIS that's integrating and going to be the spearhead for Enbridge, for the BRICS, that's going to take us to the next 80 years. So I'm really wondering, like what kind of changes other than digital currencies that can be programmable to turn your money on or off. And then it's going to integrate with UBI. So I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to get all this money, and you're going to be able to do anything you want. And then what? If you criticize something, your life means are removed. I don't know, man. It gets a little complex after that. I did have hope for the BRICS to come in and try to break something free where there might be a possibility to move in a different direction. But after seeing BIS was the spearhead of all this new Enbridge and all these things, we're just going to repeat the same system again, yet in a digital format, in a digital fashion, and there's going to be much more control over it this time versus your free cash to spend. So I don't know, perhaps the visions of the future are already our distant past, perhaps.
This is why we're gonna have to ignore them and grow. I saw this article right here, and I didn't even read it. Just the title alone tells you everything you need to know. Growing food is our greatest protest. And think about that. When you look back through history, no matter where or how far back, what you see are competing armies or competing groups of humans fighting over what? Land, food. They need food to have armies. They need armies to have food. And there's no difference now. So this idea that growing food is our greatest protest is a big idea. I didn't even read the article, but it's like learn to garden and separate yourself from capitalism's control of food. Well, I'm not worried about capitalism's control. I'm not worried about a free market's control of my food because that means I have opportunities to get more food. But in reality, it's more like a communist system. And I like to use my local grocery stores as an example of that. If you were mailing something 2 days away from anything, there's no overnight mail to here. We just happen to be in a weird spot that's off the beaten path. It's away from the interstates. So we're kind of like a little dark city that's segregated, and I get to see things unfold in this little environment, kind of like an experiment. So I go to the store, and what once was, like I said many times, big choices. I had lots of choices. There was like 5 brands of each thing when I went there. You like macaroni and cheese. Here's Annie's macaroni and cheese and the Walmart version and, Kraft's version and on and on. Now when you go there, you get 2 choices. You get the GMO kind, or you get maybe, if you're lucky, an organic variety. But that's only for like 8 or 9 products. So what we're doing is basically having to go to the store and judge how much pounds of food we need throughout the month and just buy it when it's available. So like if there's organic steaks, bison, hamburger meat, chicken, or something like that, we're getting it and we're freezing it and we're going to, we keep pulling it out later. But if I was to have to eat that other stuff, I would have to understand that you are not escaping this hydrogel platform. And what I mean by that is I can't really talk about it too open because we're on YouTube, but if you do your own research into what foods are being altered and what they're putting into it, you'll realize that all of the products that they're tampering with are alive, like tomatoes or lettuce or something you would eat in a salad, or beef that you're going to undercook if you like it rare. And there's many, 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 many millions of people that have no concept of that being a problem or an issue, or having an understanding that maybe that steak ain't the same steak as you used to eat and it's a little different. And it's getting so bizarre that I sent you that title to one of these articles. The U.S. military is mulling over whether or not to feed our troops lab-grown meat. And this is funny. For what purpose? To cut down their CO2 footprint, because we got to worry about the effects of our military. It's such a joke, right? Because how many planes, trains, and automobiles the military is running nonstop, and to say that they're going to reduce their CO2 footprint is a laughable joke. Not only because we don't need to reduce it, but also because it's one of the largest footprints that there is available to look at, right? So they're going to keep increasing the food. They're going to keep replacing the food until it's basically starvation because you don't want to opt in. And then it's really easy to opt in. So think about this scenario. You're watching your food, you're eating good, you're eating healthy, you're trying to eat pure. You run out of, you don't want to eat your emergency supplies, so you got to go grocery shopping. You go grocery shopping and you find out there are no choices for what you're trying to eat. So basically, they're food deserts, right? There's a famine going on of actual real food. So unless you know a guy that owns a cow or a guy that owns a bison that's going to chop it up and portion out some for you for 6 months or 7 months of the year, you're in a real bad position. And that's in the position that almost everyone's in. Barely anybody has thought to themselves, you know what? I need to either grow food, store food, or find a good source of food that's going to continue no matter what the economy or world events is doing. And even people that think they're super prepared, they're not ready for that. They're not ready for the shutdown of the distribution chain. Yeah, you might have some storable foods, but how long, how much? Most people only want a 3-month thing because of emergencies, but I want to store it for years. The stuff, a lot of that stuff lasts forever. Dried seeds in jars last almost forever, right? So you can hide stuff and do what they did during the Great Depression, which is use the earth and go around the system to survive. And a lot of people did that. We know that they did that. And we know also the people that were dependent were in soup kitchen lines that sometimes ran out of food, or there wasn't much food in the soup. It was mostly just broth, and they'd be lucky to get some bread with it. And that's happened over and over and over again, not just in the U.S., but many other countries throughout time where people starved to death. The government took precedent on who got the food. Their troops got the food, and even sometimes they didn't even have food for the troops. Just ask the Russians in World War II. What they were dealing with was basically no food, a frozen landscape, and people pillaging what there was to get. People didn't even have the option of something like the Second Amendment to defend themselves from either other hungry Russians or invading Germans. So they were in a spot there, and we know millions and millions of people died of starvation, not just the war. They just, if it would really blow someone's mind if you just went back to 1920 only back to 1920, or no, we can go back to 1915 and then just count not just the people that died because of the wars, but the outbreaks that followed the soldiers around and the starvation that happened and the democide by the government to prevent, people from seeing that there was massive starvation, and just start counting all the hundreds of millions and millions of people that is, and it would just blow your mind. It's horrible, and they're trying to do it again. That's what I see. And you see the chess pieces moving across the board, and I wouldn't get worried until you see either a Chinese portion of a fleet off the West Coast or a Russian one. They're already on our East Coast. They're building docks and making deals with people to have ports in other countries. I saw a thing the other day that said they're in negotiations with Mexico, Venezuela, and Cuba to set up brand new ICBM locations as a response to NATO pushing a bunch of stuff on their border. So this is all set up. The question is this a grassroots, just organic, flop out of time where these things happen? Or is this a major worldwide plan, which I would put to you that it is, just like World War II, a manufactured bad guy, manufactured emergencies. But the problem with that is that they kill real people when they do these theaters of war and exercises and ideas. And we know that they've done it, and we know that our side does it. I mean, some of the most famous think tankers and advisors, like Kissinger, famously said, we'll just use food as a weapon. And that's exactly how they destabilized the Middle East in the 70s, is using food as a weapon and using the gas and the oil production as a weapon as well. And, get ready for your tanks to go up, obviously, with this Saudi Arabia switching who they're going to use for money. They'll just do deals with everybody, which really is a problem for the people in the U.S. who dominate by setting the prices, right? So there's an inevitable crash on I don't know how many fronts. The question is which one is the domino that sets off the whole thing, and what are you going to do afterwards? What are you going to do in a post-dollar world when you can't just go to Walmart and buy whatever, food-like stuff they have there? That means millions of people are going to be in a world of hurt, not just the 350 million people that already live here, but I would say the additional 40 million people that came from other places. And I think they're setting up something real familiar about World War II. And I've been seeing more and more European leaders talking about it, including Trump over here, which would be all of a sudden to about face and now start getting rid of all the people that are here, citing food shortages, citing money implosions and inflation and stuff, where the people of the countries actually realize that they're in an emergency that they let their world governance people put them in. And if you just look at the elections across Europe, you'll know that the people are going in that direction.
Yeah, they're flipped right. I guess the pendulum moved so far that at least the elections that have come through in the last, say a week with the outcomes, for a better term, those are the people who were vocal. So what they're doing is they're sending a message out to everybody else. Don't be afraid to express your opinions. By having these opinions expressed, then more people are out there with you than you think. And perhaps this is the foothold into swinging the pendulum back the other direction. Because so far we've been walking on eggshells for how many years now, where everything you say, everything you write, it's like eggshell. You got people are going to kind of, how it's been. The censors, the populists, the whatever XYZ groups, just hold your tongue and bite it, because anything you say, and those, me and you, Ransom, I mean, we're free to say what we want. We don't have that corporate job where a CEO of a company that's worked their entire life and has all these assets that if they say the very wrong thing, everything's stripped from them. We don't have that kind of fear. Like, can you imagine the fear of upper level management and CEO and C-level positions, the CFOs, COOs, etc., of any one wrong remark or any one wrong compliment or one wrong word said to the opposite sex in the office, and your career is destroyed. Your retirement's revoked. I mean, everything you ever worked for, it goes down to zero, where there's no retirement for you anymore. So imagine the eggshell, terrified, moving into the office kind of, that they have to go through every day. Like, luckily, we don't have to experience that. And maybe we've taken different paths in life, which allows us much more freedom to express. But I think the messaging from those elections was, don't be afraid to express your opinions. We are all with you, and there's far, far, far more of us and you out there than you could possibly imagine. It's just been this very small fraction. Because the American Revolution was won with 3% of the populace involved. Some say 4%. But it never was 5%. I never heard the number 5% ever. It's always been 3 or 4% of the populace. So is it not the same now, where these same ideologies and principles were pushed by 3% or 2% of the populace, and then had the other 90% skewed around? I think it's coming back a different direction. It has to. Because you were talking about what was the result of all this, sieging and, World War II and death and destruction and, like sieging of cities in Russia, etc. Well, the end result was trading recipes for boiled belts and eating the glue off the wallpaper in the homes of the time that used glue manufactured basically from horse hooves or mules' hooves. Do you realize it got down to the point where people ate the glue off the wallpaper, and the homes were stripped bare of wallpaper at the end of the famine? Most people know Stalingrad, Leningrad. The sieges in both of those places people were eating the belt. Do you realize the belt that you're wearing in your pants, they were boiling that to try to get some of what you referenced, bone broth out, some broth out of it. But at that point too, there were far, 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 far less chemicals than there were today. So things were, relatively very natural. So part of the recipes for boiling it were just as you would do today. You have to boil it for 15 or 20 minutes. Think of Jerusalem artichoke. You need to boil it for 20 minutes to remove some toxins. Taro as well. You're going to have to boil that to remove some of the toxins. Boiling your belt to remove some of the chemicals. We're talking in the 1940s, though. There's a certain amount of time you need to boil your leather belt to remove all of the dyes and that sort of thing to turn it into some sort of like very, almost like you've seen a dog chew on one of those rawhides for, a good 12, 15 hours and it got incredibly soft. Well, that's where your belt turned into, and then you would cut it off in a little slice, throw some salt on it, and try to chew on it as long as you could to get something in your belly. That's what these kind of wars bring to people. And that's not a vision of reality that I see myself in at all, in any way, shape, or form. I do not accept that. I won't accept it. Is my reality going to be different because I don't accept that reality? And are we in the hologram or what your thought creates for you? And, you and I, Ransom, will be in safe positions in the new wealth class coming out of this transference and shifting of our planet.
500-mile journey to California in what would become one of the greatest tragedies in the history of westward migration. Reed found others seeking to find fortune, adventure, and new beginnings on this perilous trek across the West. Among them was the Donner family. Others like the Graves, Breens, Murphys, Eddies, McCutcheons, Kesebergs, and the Wolfingers would come too. The successful Reed was determined his family would not suffer on the long journey, as his wagon was an extravagant two-story with a built-in iron stove, spring-cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping, and 2 hired servants to help with the workload. Reed's 12-year-old Virginia dubbed it the Pioneer Palace Car. Also in the group were the families of George and Jacob Donner. George Donner was a successful 62-year-old farmer who had migrated 5 times before settling in Springfield, Illinois, along with his brother Jacob. Obviously adventurous, the brothers decided to make one last trip to California. At the bottom of Jacob Donner's saddlebag was a copy of Lansford Hastings's Emigrant's Guide, with its tantalizing talk of a faster route to the Garden of the Earth. It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal, I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started, but as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey, the Sierra Nevada, with peaks up to 14,000 feet. It's known if you fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls, the repercussions and results can be both horrifying and deadly. As the Donner Party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a pivotal flaw in his decision to splinter off from the main party. Hastings Cutoff says it's a fine level road with plenty of water and grass, saving 400 miles. As it turns out, Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the so-called shortcut adds at least 100 miles to the journey. High in the Sierra Nevada, the Donner Party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains, but supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll, ending in a broken axle. The Donner Party stops to make repairs, but that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner Party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves, and dirt. Finally, a suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live. Cannibalism. On Christmas Day, 1846, a Christmas feast like few others takes place. They devour their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled so people don't eat their own kin. Later, 4 rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds a man named Ludwig alone. Around him, a scene that haunts us today and will continue to leave a lasting mark in history. Ludwig is surrounded by bones and entrails, a 2-gallon kettle filled to the brim with human blood. Also nearby is George Donner's body, his skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found. It also seems a man named William Foster shot 2 Miwok Native American guides named Lewis and Salvador for food, which is the only instance of anyone in the Donner-Reed party that was murdered and eaten. The rest of the cannibalized were already dead. They took the survivors to Sutter's Fort, California, by the route that is now known as Donner Pass. Stranded in the early snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly half the travelers died of starvation and illness. Even today, Interstate 80 has to be closed occasionally due to heavy snows and blizzards. Only 45 of the original 81 members of the Donner Party survived. This truly was the worst road trip ever, which reminds us not to be complacent but instead be proactive with our prepping. We don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have My Patriot supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with ADAPT 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
So how are we going to navigate through the changes? Well, an enormous amount of people have ideas, and I'm so glad that we're allowed to talk about it. 50 ideas, 50 different viewpoints, all available here. Revolution Radio. Everybody can talk freely. You can take what you want, leave what you want, and hopefully it'll enhance your life. So if you consider that worth something, hit that donation tab right there, revolution.radio at the top, navigate, or the nav bar or navigation bar, whatever you like to say that. There's a donate tab there. Because moving forward, the food is going to be the most important thing for us. And proteins, well, that's going to be the most difficult. You can raise a garden, that's easy. Hunting, in the beginning, if you have your own private land and you know where all the resources are, you could harvest that. But I'm telling you, I have a pest license I have a registered farm anyway. So my pest license includes rabbits off season because they are absolutely devastating our gardens and what we put out for our plants this year. But those plants are for sale later on. The produce off the plants are for sale later on. So we are allowed to take rabbits as a pest. There are so many this year, it's unbelievable. You drive up the driveway and you see like 2 or 3 coming in, you get up top of the driveway, there's more, and then after sundown, you're looking through the thermal scope and there's like more and more and more. Every time I shoot one, it seems like 2 or 3 come back. Like in a really grid down situation, they would be hunted out completely. Because the skittishness of me, one dude hunting on my own land to get rid of a pest, which I need to get rid of because now it's taking out part of our crops. Me, one guy, as soon as boom, a shot rings off, a couple, might get a few, chances out there. Rabbits, sometimes they'll try to freeze if they hear something, but you get like 2, maybe 3 maximum, and boom, they're gone. But then they don't come back for days. It's not like they just sit there days on end where you can keep hunting and hunting and hunting. It's they have a shelf life of acceptability of noises around before they move, also understanding the danger. Like once you harvest like 2 or 3 rabbits in an evening, man, you won't see anything for a few days. Like they all understand. Like my friend Ralph got taken last night and Gertrude over there is no longer there. What happened to her? So everything is very skittish and off base. And it's just like, the forest goes, or the rabbit in the forest goes silent for a few days. Like you take one, you won't see them for a while. And they'll come back, give them a few days and don't make any more noises for, a good 3 to 4 days and you'll see something again. But during these times, you read about the stories of the Great Depression and the diaries of the Great Depression, and everything was hunted out and you gotta realize that's the 1930s. The forests were so hunted out that It made no sense to go that far in for the deer because you got to realize in the 1930s, also the coolers, what we consider coolers, and refrigeration technology for transport, just it's not what it was today. So the resources they spent to go that deep into the forest to harvest a deer, by the time they got it out, it was rotted. How far are they going in? And to the point where the forests were completely hunted out, the sparrows were gone. That's how far it was hunted out. So where does that leave us today then? If you think that's going to be your option to hunt, no. So if I could start for a quickie, because Ransom, he left off last hour talking about going in to buy steaks or food in the store by the pound that the family needs for a month, for example. So I'm going to give you my personal, we went and got a Holstein steer from the Amish, 850 pounds, and it was $2 a pound live weight. So $1,700, and they only use cash. So you have to have at least that much cash laying around to go pay for the cow. And we took it to a butcher, and it weighed out. I'm just gonna round it off. It was 425 pounds live weight. It was a little bit more because we took the tongue we got the liver and the heart out of the animal too. So we were able to extract a little more meat than most people because they would just go for steaks, ditch the bone and all that stuff. We had a couple bones that were left in there. But otherwise, the hanging weight meat, like the total amount of meat we got was about 425 pounds. Then we spent about $75 for them to prepare the sausages that came out of some of the meat there. And it was $500, let's say, evenly. So you're looking for a 850-pound cow, steer, not a female, steer, male. 425 pounds of solid meat of all the cuts you can think, from like the T-bone to the rib eyes to the New York strips and everything in between, the Korean cut steaks, and there's like just a tremendous amount of meat there, tremendous. It cost $2,200. Then if you split it with somebody else, but then putting away 425 pounds, or that's a lot of meat. Then you got multiple freezers full of meat, splitting off with some relatives, splitting it off with some friends. So let's say you're left with 200 pounds of meat. You're like, oh, 200 pounds, that's not much. Dude, it's going to fill your fridge and freezer completely. So what happens if your power goes out? I mean, do you have your burners with your natural gas propane cylinders there to start canning immediately? Because the old timers and some of the people I know that always get like full beef, if you're going to buy a full beef, the number one thing that they've taught me, or I've learned, is when the power goes out for a prolonged period of time, the number one thing you need to do is have a second backup plan so that meat does not spoil. So the instant that you're in a prolonged grid down, this is predominantly in Florida. I'm learning from some people in Florida after hurricanes. They got a full beef down there. Freezers go out. They know they're going to be out for 7, 10, 14 days. What they do is they start firing up their burners and canning immediately, where it goes from the frozen straight into their canning jars. If they need to, they'll take a large knife and chop it. At that point, there's no more T-bones. It's steak that tastes pretty good, and it's in a jar, and it didn't fit through the opening in the lid, so they had to cut it in half, so it's like half of a T-bone on the steak. And you just start jamming everything in there and immediately canning. So having a huge amount of meat is great, but on the flip side, if you lose electricity for a longer period of time, you're going to also have to have propane cylinders and some sort of burner, and have 100 jars, hundreds of jars ready at your disposal to be able to can the meat. So I mean, what your backup plan for plan B involves also having somebody's primary plan of canning stuff, so it's different levels of preparedness. How long would that last? I don't know. We've almost gone through that cow already. I mean, we've eaten everything down. We got maybe like one layer in the freezer left of that cow that we bought. So obviously we're going to need another, but butchers are booked out and we're trying to work something out here. So, I mean, we're coming down to some of the last of our beef from the last time. So, I mean, our stockpiles aren't where I would like them to be, anywhere close to it. But, that's life. We're trying to adjust right now ourselves. So I'm just talking from experience on giving pricing out there. So anybody, I mean, how many people have $2,200 laying around that can go to an Amish farm somewhere and then get that full beef sent off to a butcher? This is a level of things of people you're competing with. And if you don't understand that, you're going to be way back in line and you're not going to be anywhere close to getting what you need, because that's where you need to be. And if you're not out there on the weekends meeting those people and trying to make the contacts and get in and understand where your food's coming from at bulk, I don't know. But see, Ransom's way ahead of the game too by buying by the month of what they need for the family. Most people are rocking in on what they need for the next meal in a store. That's crazy. How short-sighted could you be? And if you are that way, I'm sorry. You need to expand your range of thinking to a month, to a full cow, or wherever you're going to go in between on that. But it can't be for a day's food that you're not going to last. There's going to be a natural selection here thing going on. But Ransom, hey man, welcome back for the second hour. Sorry, Ransom, I rambled on that. I was trying to, set the stage for, getting some preparedness ready here on what costs are. But I don't know, maybe that's not the same price where you are. I'm not sure. But here in East Tennessee, that's what it was.
We're paying, it's got to be $9 a pound at least for organic, steaks or something. I think you can get the hamburger meat, bison, stuff like that for probably $6.50 to $7 a pound. But when you look over at the other selection of the meat, it's already at $8 and $9 a pound also. So why not buy the supposed organic stuff? But that's exactly why, all of those families, I'm sure when you were a kid, you'd go around and everybody had a freezer. Meemaw and Pawpaw had a freezer either outside in their carport or in a shed, or one of the rooms in their house was designated to freezers. It's because they would get all of the, whatever they got from the farm, they would freeze it. And meat, they'd have lots of meat in the freezer. Matter of fact, there was a whole time, I think it was around probably 1995, I was in Arkansas, and there was a massive string of freezer robberies that was on the news about people going around and, with the crowbar popping the top of those little, the goofy lock on it, because nobody really expected somebody to steal right out of their carport or their shed to get food. But that's exactly what they were doing. They were, just going around the countryside, popping locks, stealing everything out of the freezer. And that means they were probably watching the people and waited for the right time to go into their property without being unknown. But nowadays we have all of this surveillance, security, etc. But you're right. When the lights go out, all of that is nil and void unless you've set up some kind of backup system. And let's be honest, there's not that many MacGyvers out there that have gone through the entire process of making sure they have a lighting system set up for, when the power's out. Matter of fact, speaking of that, weirdly, I was in Walmart just yesterday and the power went out in there and people freaked out. They were just, it looked like a terrorist attack, and it was only like 3 seconds that power was out. People were freaking out in there. I get why, but think about this for a second. If you're really going to go hardcore and plan on saving what you need as meats, you might not be able to do that. Really logistically or financially. But you can store back protein powders and different things that are made from meat or salted meats. They're not the best in the world. It's not filet mignon. It's not a fresh ribeye, but it's protein that you'll need. And also, we've talked about this many times, giant containers of lard, right? There's essential proteins and fats in there that will keep you alive, even if you only had vegetation to live off of. I mean, literally, that's food. It's greasy. It's kind of gross. People don't really eat stuff like that no more. But this is a whole world different now. I'm only I think I'm going to turn 47 this year. When I was a kid, and of course, it was a little different from the city to out in the countryside. I got to experience both of those types of environments a lot. But in the countryside, I never went hungry. I never went hungry. It was never like, oh, nobody has nothing in the refrigerator. So and so next door, they ain't got no food stamps left. I mean, it's sad story all around. I get it. But in the country, like I said, people had freezers. They were poor, but as long as they could pay the electric bill, there was probably a bunch of, frozen okra and squash and tomatoes, whatever their neighbors had. There was a lot of that going on. And not only that, people had, I would go out to their place, and I'm talking about people that live remote. They would only go into town to get salt and stuff like that, maybe once every 6 months. So they already knew how to just live off of their land. And this is all the way probably up to the late 90s. They were still living that way. But now, they got their cell phones and their internet and all of this stuff. But guess what they're still probably doing? Growing that food, eating that food. And, when I was a kid too, all of the elderly people had things that were old school that you would never think about seeing today, like what about a jar of mayonnaise that's been sitting on the table at 90 degrees for the last week and people are still shoveling it on their pickled eggs and stuff? Man, I used to see that stuff all the time. People were living that way. Those were the old people when I was a kid. They obviously, most of those people are gone, but their boomer kids didn't, for the most part, in my opinion, did not take the lessons and the way of life seriously that their parents had, and they didn't understand, I guess. I don't know really what the issue was, but there was like a whole generation of knowledge lost between boomers and Generation X. Thankfully, most of those people were grandparents, and even though their children didn't listen too good, they tried to at least pass it on to their spoiled brat grandparents, which, I'm saying, I mean, grandkids. I was one of those that they, called snot-nosed brat and all of that stuff. I heard all of those sayings about that when I was a kid. Yeah, I'm hungry. Hey, shut up. Children are meant to be seen and not heard. And the whole thing, that world's gone. People don't get it. And all of that inherited knowledge is basically gone, because the people that I meet, it's not that they're dumb, or like they didn't go to school and learn how to count and they know their ABCs and they're pretty literate, but they absolutely know nothing, and it boggles my mind. Like, they don't know phrases. They didn't pay attention to them when they were a kid. Like, I say phrases all the time. People look at me weird because they never heard it. There's no connection to them in this world that they live in now, which is all about devices and little short letter combos that mean complete ideas. You could say that's an evolution of communication, but at the same time, it's a dumbing down of the way that we even communicate. So what happens when you take that network away for a period of time? Because I'm not saying that it'll go away forever, because the elite plan on using this network and control system mechanism. They've already proved that it works. They've already proved they can get everybody to addicted to it in a short amount of time. Let's face it, it's been since 2005 to now that the cell phone revolution has really happened, where people are now carrying around little personalities in their pocket with names called Droid and Alexa, and on and on and on and on. The AI is going exponential. People now use the phone and the internet and Google and Wikipedia and things that are edited on the daily and censored as their hard drive for their knowledge. So you have to remember that when things get rough, that these people are uneducated, they don't know anything, they haven't been paying attention, and some of the main things that you need to know, they don't know. Other than people, I would make a friend, even in today's world, even if they're Gen X, that's either an electrician or, a carpenter, or at least somebody that has basic building ability, some kind of mechanic, with basic, I can build a house, I can work on my car, I can grow food, I can play with computers, but that's because I think I was Gen X and I was just right in that phase over, portion. But now we're coming into a world that we are going to be the holders and teachers of knowledge And nothing against boomers, but they didn't do a good job. There's like some kind of generational gap that happened, and they really bought into the Marxist ideas hard. And I don't blame them because they've been bombarded for decades with these things. And now we're coming to the time where we're saying, hey, you know what? Maybe there's just aliens that live on the earth that may have given us the AI, and they're just kicking it. And um, I mean, because these ideas are being serious now. They're coming out like this is the Hill, right? This isn't the tabloid. Hidden UFO civilization could be on Earth, Harvard researcher, right? And then you have over here, Pentagon wants to feed troops experimental lab meat to reduce CO2 footprint. It's just bizarre, headlines. Where was the other one where they were talking about? Oh, yeah, here it is. Reveals tantalizing 7-minute encounter with glowing blue UFO, which emitted enough energy to power a small city, which is another thing that they're releasing to the public at this time, too. Ideas on anti-gravitics, superconductivity, the idea that some of the old paradigms and education that they're still mainly holding on to are unraveling from everything from anthropology to the unfolding of the universe around you, right? So it's all coming unglued right in time for a great reset. You got to put the genie back in the bottle. It's the perfect time because you have so many uneducated people on the things that matter most. History, even whatever you think's important, if it came out of the old world, your great-grandchildren aren't even going to know about it. And especially if there's a bunch of or a series of cataclysms being either natural or, manufactured by the elite. Either way, it's going to get really hairy here in, I think, the next 10 years. And the reason I say 10 years is because I know some of their plans are still talking about 2040, 2045. They want certain things in place. And, you can blame me or say I'm crazy, but I take them at their word. And the reason for that is because I've been paying attention since the early 90s when I was a teenager at the things that they said they were going to do. And, Agenda 2020 came, Agenda 2030 came. And how much of that did they get accomplished? Well, I would say it's a lot. Some of it got cut off because people recognized it, but they just morphed it into some kind of other program and they pushed it. And you see that the governments now will put a vote up as many times as it takes until they get it. And if they don't get the whole thing, they'll get part of it. And then next time they'll get another little part of it. But I think they're done with incrementalism. That phase is over. They're just going to put it in everybody's face. Famine, war, and the redrawing of nations, the entire concept of education and the monetary system. That's what's going to be reset. And like, I say it a lot, but just like a computer system, and that's really what we're talking about, especially with the implementation of these new techs with AI and the other platforms of tech that they're putting out. It all needs to be reset so that the new programs can come online. Once the new programs come online, then we're talking. I think that's going to literally be now till like 10 years from now. And that's it. No more waiting. And you've seen how fast the last decade went and how much has changed since then. So if you don't think that it's possible, really, just think back to 2005 and tell me that the world is even close or resembles the same place that it did then.
Oh, you're hurting my heart, man. Those 2005 glory days. But remember the 1990s days when everything was rocking on the planet and, like you get late for a flight 5 minutes and they gave you like a $300 voucher back then to get on a new flight and they give you a hotel for complaining one time. And those days are long gone, man. If you're talking about traveling in the 80s and 90s, sheesh. But they would come on an announcement and go, all right, if anybody wants to give up their seat, we'll give you a $300 voucher and give you a free hotel in the city where you're at right now. And we'll get on the next plane the next day. And we'll upgrade your seat to like a business class seat if you take the next flight. And just watch people raise their hand. Now they overbook on purpose. Crazy. But, living in an old world and then getting plunged into this new world and then seeing a new world evolving, like living in 3 different worlds in my lifetime. It's quite the interesting viewpoint of coming from a child, having that grandparent experience you're talking about. Because my parents went from Leave It to Beaver to the Beatles. Right. That's like a huge, gigantic change. And then, visiting the grandparents on the summers and helping repaint the house and that sort of thing. And they had the root cellar and seeing all those old ways that they still lived in, but then also getting plugged into the new world where, oh, grandparents, they're not cool. They're still got a damn root cellar and stuff. Like they don't have a fridge. Like, come on. Learning that kind of, getting in that like opaque world of splitting worlds. And then we hit the 80s and 90s again, where things just, I really believe the apex of America was probably somewhere around like 1993 to 95, 97, before that first dot-com crisis occurred. And then obviously after 2000 when it really crashed out. But up to that point, just as my viewpoint, my parents might disagree and say the apex of our world and their world was, mid 60s before the stagflation of the 70s. But in me, what I can remember, I would definitely say it's somewhere around like 95-ish, where it was the apex. Like there was the most opulence, the most wealth running around, just everything was so easy. And the way to travel, because I used to travel a lot back then, and comparatively to today, it's not even the same. You're in a cattle car today. Before you used to, have some luxury. But with that said, I want to, maybe I'm going to go a little East Tennessee style on here, y'all. You have to think about different types of food sources moving through this transition period here. So I'm just going to speak. A friend of mine, Ryan, shout out, Appalachia Observatory. If you're listening tonight, thanks for the cookbook recipe from preparing squirrel. Water, salt, and squirrel from the old Appalachian recipes. There's going to be a few things that you can look for this is in the East US, but I'm sure it's, predominantly a lot of species around. So squirrel will be an easy one. Rabbit's another one. Possum. Groundhog, which my grandma used to use a shotgun to harvest, but my mom hated it because they had to cook it for so long, for like days, to get it to whatever, soften up. And my mom would always complain about the smell in the house and like, oh, I can't believe your grandma would cook this damn groundhog and thing. But the way she would always harvest it was she'd wait for it to push the head up and hit it with a shotgun, and never try to put pellets in the meat. So she'd only wait for it to pop the head up above. She would describe the way grandma would used to hunt for this thing. But the smell, for boiling it for days on end in the house, but, keeping all the windows open and all that stuff. Raccoons. But here's another thing. Even in today's world, like today, raccoons, as long as you clean them out and feed them corn for about 3 days, there's still a vast demand for raccoon. Like my brother-in-law, who grew up here in Knoxville and knows an enormous amount of people, everybody knows he hunts and thing. So the guys downtown are like, man, you get some of those coons, you make sure you get them back to us, you trap them, put them in the safe traps. So which I'll come back to in a second here. But there's a large demand for raccoon, especially if you can clean it out with corn for 3 days. You need to feed it corn 3 days straight and like clean out its system. And don't overlook turtles either. There's a huge amount of, protein sources with turtles. Beavers, you got the tail, which is an oily tail, which is one of the things they would mix with pemmican, in addition to whatever kind of meat you would put in there, deer meat and all the different kind of berries and things. But if you could get the beaver tail for the oil, that was a huge one versus lard. Like if you could, that was like the creme de la creme was beaver tail oil versus like lard from a pig or something rendered down. Beaver tail oil was the number one. It'd be like macadamia nut oil or something like that today. And then you got the meat off the beaver. Now, don't overlook birds. There's tons of birds everywhere, but they're going to be hunted out. Now, snakes, you can eat those. You're going to need a minnow trap with an egg in the back of a minnow trap to capture the snakes. You want to keep them alive if you're going to eat them. I'm not really, I love snakes, man. I love them. My neighbors are like, dude, there's a snake on my property. I'm like, you're my neighbor, dude. It probably came from my property over here. I'll come and get it and I'll bring it back to my property. Because I think they're just the most wonderful, things to pest control. So, if one of my neighbors is going, Dave, you know a lot about snakes, man. We got this thing over here. Okay, we got a rat snake. We got some kind of hognose snake. We got whatever, like a corn snake or something. I will get it and bring it over and put it back in the barn so it can eat the mice or whatever that's running around the barn. You got a snake in your barn for a little bit, but once it eats the mice in there and it runs out and it's not eating your feed anymore, then it'll move out of the barn eventually after it eats all the mice, and then it'll go on its way. So if you catch snakes, put them in your barn, they'll eat what's in the barn, and then they'll leave. That's the whole secret. They're not going to stay there forever. They're looking for food. Let them eat the mice in your barn, throw a bunch of snakes in there, if you catch them from your neighbor's property, or find them on your own property in the springtime, get them in, throw them in the barn, and you go. Don't eat the snakes in the springtime. They're the ones that are going to eat all your pests, that are going to eat all your crops and eat all your stored grains. So you need the snakes. Don't eat them until later on at the end of the year, if you need to. But I mean, this is old world knowledge here. This is like Appalachia foodstuffs and different times of the year that you would eat something. Like you would never eat snakes in spring because they're to eat the mice that are growing, that got raised up, that survived the winter, that are now eating your grains that you're storing to feed your chickens and whatnot. You never eat snakes in the beginning of the year, ever. End of the year, yeah, if you find a couple, maybe if you're hungry, you can, keep those alive somewhere until you're harvesting them through the winter. They used to have like these snake boxes where they would bring mice in or find some pests or, insects and thing and throw them in and let these snakes stay alive until the winter, and then they'd harvest them for food. I think about the enormous amount of birds, from the pheasants to other types of, if you get hungry enough, you're going to eat a sparrow, which I never would even consider doing because I'm always going to be more prepared than that. But if you're listening to this and you're unprepared, bro, your last choice is going to be a sparrow. And I pity you if your food source and you are grateful for harvesting a sparrow, you didn't prepare enough for listening. And anything that we are saying, or even get the general trend of where the world is moving to, you are blind. If you are harvesting sparrows when you are hungry, you are blind to what the rest of the world is happening right now. And I'm so sorry that your eyes are not open enough to see that. Safe traps are the fastest and easiest way to catch. You can go hunting all night. You can spend your time getting super tired, staying up till 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, getting up at that time to go hunt or whatever. Okay, deer, something bigger, cool. Put out a safe trap. You're going to catch something 100% every single night, every single time. As long as you put the right bait in there with peanut butter and you get some other whatever oils, some veg in there, you're always going to catch something 100% of the time. You just put it out, snap, and the thing's still alive. So you can keep it alive as long as you need to until you want to harvest it. But I'm just talking old world Appalachian, just everybody knows this stuff. So again, if you're looking at competition, somebody going out that knows all the butchers and knows all the people who raise cattle, that's going to be your competition for getting meat in the future. The people that understand how to harvest food on their land in terms of every single mammal or reptile that is described to you: squirrels, rabbits, possums, groundhogs, raccoons, turtles, beavers, snakes, fish, if you're in a pond, obviously. You're competing with them, the old people who know the old ways too of being able to harvest those animals. So don't think you're limited to a supermarket. If you know where to look and how to set traps, there's still something that's going to wander into that. So anyway, Ransom, I was just trying to explain that, supermarkets, we're going to have to rewind the clock, because you were talking about grandparents, and the only way anybody's going to move through this next segment of our world is if they remember the ways from our grandparents. And that is going to really separate the wheat from the chaff.
That's absolutely true. And I've been watching a lot of these videos of people bragging, about getting little voles or rats, gophers, all these different things out of their gardens with the little traps that you put in there. And if you really think about that, I personally, every time I see one of those videos, I think, well, one day there's your meat source. You're not only growing the food, but it's also the bait for some meat to come in, and you might raise your eyebrows at that. But a lot of those animals, like you said, the whole time you were explaining that about keeping them and, maybe letting them get bigger. If you wanted to eat those things, you would probably eat the snakes. If you don't want them, normally You don't want those things around your stuff. But if the goal is to bring those type of animals, lure them in, you might grow crops that the wildlife also likes. And that way you get a 2-for-1 bang for your buck there if things are really that hard. I know normally that sounds counterproductive, but every time I watch one of those videos where they pull this big old fat gopher up out of the ground that was eating their strawberries or pulling all of their tubers up and eating them and stuff like that, I think, well, you fattened it up, you might as well eat it since you killed it. You know what I'm saying? And the snakes, really, I always laugh at people that, they're kind of like busybodies, but I think they have good intention. But they'll be the ones that calls the city or the county on some wild cats, and then 3 months later they're whining because there's a 20-foot rattlesnake in their yard, or mice are running around their house and chewing up their wires. Squirrels are known for that. But if you had cats, you wouldn't have those. If you left a snake, you wouldn't have those other things either, because that's what it's looking for. And you're creating the environment around you. And that's something I think people just really don't understand. We have such a connection with the earth that everything that you do in an area, let's give it an acre. If you walked around that acre every day and you just slightly manipulated what was going on, which is the main kind of focus of permaculture, you're creating an environment, whether it's just walking over certain plants, pulling up plants, letting some plants grow. You could just make the environment, but you have to keep in mind that it's not just you. The animals also like those things. So you can literally plan out how and what is living around you. And that's like money in the bank. Like right now, if I really wanted to be kind of ornery, I would, start putting out fresh vegetables for the cottontails and the other rabbits to come up here, and I could just trap them and freeze them. If I really needed to do that, I could do that. But then we have to remember, in times of emergency, there's going to be millions and millions of other people trying to do the same things. But because, like we said before, they're not as educated on the avenues on where to look for food, how to find it. We've talked a lot about, setting up your property in the past with things that people wouldn't even recognize as food, like wild clover, lamb's quarter, all of these other things that just look like a bunch of weeds or plants. They're going to be, wrestling their way through those, especially if you live in a green area like Tennessee. I could just imagine, the amount of time it would take actually to manipulate it, because it grows so fast there. Where I'm at, it's a little bit easier. So like this year, I didn't plan anything yet because I was expecting the really hot part of the summer like last year, and I know it damaged a lot of my plants. So I know that the season is a little bit longer here than most people get. So most of the plants can handle cool nights. So I'm just going to start late after the heat wave and then plant everything and see what I get. But because I've planted like 3 years in a row, I can go outside right now and find stuff that I didn't plant this year that just started growing because of putting the plants out there. So there's carrots out there. I've seen some potatoes still growing in different places that must have just had one little piece of potato I missed. They're growing a bunch of plants, melons, because some of them rot every once in a while and they fall down off the vine before you get them. And then, every time you water it, spreads them around. And then next year you just go out there and there's cilantro and there's potatoes and carrots and melons growing. I didn't plant anything. But this was just from minimal effort for the last couple of years. So you can imagine being on a piece of land, or at least have access to land around where you live. You might not own, that's kind of in between, or forest areas. And you can go out there and permaculture it and have a nice hike all the time. You can do stuff during the winter. You can imagine the future. And really, that's what separates us from animals that a lot of people don't really understand, is that humans are kind of wired not to see a problem if the problem is far off in the future. So, we can deal with saber-toothed cat. We can deal with the person starting violence with you right in front of you. Emergencies that are happening now, a lot of people are kind of wired to deal with that. But if you can really think about traveling to the future, or being a time traveler, so to speak, and realize that if you keep in mind any goal or any action and you focus and concentrate on that, and you continually just make a little bit of effort every day to continue that path, it's basically like time traveling. You can skip to the future where you're going to be at, where there's all kinds of stuff there. Like, I've been just letting little elm trees grow around the property where they want to come up. And now I have 10 years later, these giant trees starting to grow on my property that I don't water. I don't water because they've gone down to the aquifer already. So out in the middle of the dry, dirty, used to be a savanna grassland, but now it's like a mesquite desert. There's giant trees growing all around people's properties because where it can grow, it will grow. So it just needs a little bit of help. If you live in one of the places like you do where you get plenty of rainfall, you can just mentally landscape the whole thing. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir to you because that's exactly what you're doing there. But you can just see the future in a few years. And if you keep in mind that there's going to be hard times eventually, that's exactly what you're trying to design, is an earth that will symbiotically feed you back as long as you keep doing those actions. And that's something that the entire civilization, mostly, except for in third world countries, have moved away from. I know it's kind of trendy for some people to garden and stuff, but they're not really putting in the effort in a planning for the future type way where you're putting back years of food. And you know what? Who cares if things don't turn out bad and they stay peachy? Those things will be around for the next generation to be able to do something with if, and God forbid, they end up with those scenarios. And I wanted to, just before I shut up here, go back to this Mayan, a lot of information came out of this article that they're not even talking about. So, we know that they killed all male children, just about, almost 100% male children. They purposely picked families that had twins or multiple children in it, multiple males. They killed them when they were young, literally preventing a future army from existing. The same thing that I was talking about the permaculture. Well, these guys, the people that really think about things into the future, and they're alive today, believe me, they plan out these things. They know what the repercussions are going to be because of knowledge of previous cycles. So they can just say, hey, we need to sacrifice all these children for whatever reason. And if that becomes politically popular or culturally popular, like, I don't know, Planned Parenthood or something, you can get rid of entire haptype groups and just prevent future armies from, messing with you. But think about this. This is another key. This happened between 500 and 900 AD, which is also the same period in which the Maya go dormant for like 100 years. And actually, all of this really started right in 539 AD. I think it's right year, right? Or is it 579? I forget. Anyway, the worst year to be alive year. I forget which exact year it is, but it's right in there in that range in the 530s to 540. And all around the world, everybody starved to death. Everybody had crops frozen. I mean, it was a really bad year for all cultures. But the Maya specifically, they just disappear. Poof, they're gone as far as building and stuff. But they didn't disappear as far as sacrificing a bunch of people because there were bad times. So that's probably the reason that they did it. But they also had other agendas, obviously. That's why they only killed males. They made sure to get twins. I know that sounds familiar from more recent time periods targeting twins. But it shows that after, all of these volcanoes or whatever happened, that these people totally went crazy. They sacrificed people. Their populations dwindled almost to nothing. But not only that, they set out and started conquering. And we know that because up here in the Four Corners area, we have people like the Gambler. Chaco Canyon starts its construction about 600. That would be right after this. So the people started collecting seeds and grain out of necessity, I think. Because, the last 50 years were pretty bad because the earth got put in a reset, probably due to multiple volcanoes and some cosmogenic material coming down on the earth. But all of these things came from this. And if you really study South American history, Central American and North American, you realize everything reset right then about 600. So from 530 to 600, all of the old empires went tits up, and a bunch of new empires showed up and took their place, and culture changed, ideas changed, and indeed the haptypes of all people changed because, well, a bunch of people disappeared. So you could see how that correlates today, and it doesn't matter if it's a man-made global emergency or a natural cycle, the result is the same. They reset completely.
Well, you just hit it on the head, 100%. Like these cycle durations are known through history for thousands of years. So if we look at a Mayan reset, say circa 535, 545, that's very late, very, very late in the game of understanding. If you're going back 4,000 years of history and they're understanding the cycles, the cycles coming through, you're only 1,500 years in the past. Of a total of, I would say, easily 4,000 years of understood cycles. So you have 2,500 years prior to that they understood when this thing is going to repeat again. And from that point, from 1,500 years ago until today, it's even more of a refined science, shall we say. So the only thing I can come back to again is what I was saying earlier, is this entity, this archon energy that requires pain and suffering, that, this Moloch, for a better term, that people devote their souls and lives and energies to, was the same, whether you call it the jinn or whatever you like to term it, has been here equally far, 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 far longer. What it always, I'm perplexed. The question that I might ask is, if they're doing this in the Sumerian time, some 7,000 years prior, and the Egyptians as well were doing it, they're trying to gain favor with something on the other side of the veil in a different dimensional realm. I'd say it's outside of our perceptual abilities at this moment, but it exists, that gives something power inside this third dimension, which we can interact with in terms of energies and physicality, money, wealth. Something like this is a transference of, you give me this much wealth, I give you this much pain, suffering, and soul energy at the moment. So you're just beyond the veil, can feed off of that. There's a transference of feeding. It's a transference, not of energy. It's of, you give me wealth and opulence, and I will give you a human suffering, physical body, and then soul to feed off of during that time. There's always has to, that it seems like this archon energy is always looking for a human feed source. And as far as you go back, it always seems to be part of the interplay of this yin yang of dark and light. It never has not existed. That's the whole thing in the records, as far as it goes back. To post Younger Dryas. So we're talking, 12,300 something years prior until today. This duality of light and dark, and this archon energy, and this veil blending between, whether it's spell casting or whatever it is to touch that other side, has never not been without us in the last 12,000 years. So if that were the case, and if truly there were previous societies and civilizations before the exit of the Ice Age, say 20,000 years ago, when our Earth, just because of solar activity and increased electric flows through our star, changed us from an ice world into this interglacial period. There are remnants in talk of previous civilizations, whether it be the Atlantean civilization or the Lemurian civilization, I don't care what you call it. But there are references and stories of civilizations far prior to coming out of the Ice Age. So if we are in this duality of light and dark, and this same force has been trying to, and has communicated between the realm of physical humans and itself. Have you ever done a handful of magic mushrooms? You blend through and you break through what you understand as what you see in front of you. The world shifts. I really believe that's the reason that penalties for some of these, like LSD, is far, greater than if you take a life of another human being. Because it breaks through the programming, it breaks through the chrysalis. Like, you can see there's another side of that. And you can actually sometimes touch into that, just for a glinting moment of something on the other side. And it's there. You absolutely 1,000% know there's something on the other side of the veil. Now, how much energy do you devote to actually communicating with that or trying to communicate in contact with that? And is it of light or dark is a different question, you know. But if we come back to previous civilizations, if this entity has been here the entire time of the last 12,000 years that we understand time, then it was obviously, it's a construct of the universe, Ransom, which you've also mentioned. So it was here obviously during the Lemurian or the Atlantean times. If you believe there were civilizations that arose after the climate stabilized for 50,000 years during our ice age. Our climate has been stable for 10,000 years, or even 8,000, and we've arisen to where we sit today. So we had a 50,000 year stable period during our ice age. So if you feel that a civilization could have arisen during 50,000 years of stable climate, we've had 8,000 years of stable climate. It's going to be the same. There's some, you know, rules within the universe here. And one of those would be that this energy exists at all times. So they would have tapped into it as well. So is it just, you might think it's so dark and this and that and today, but would we just be experiencing the same thing no matter what time frame that we lived in, depending on the millennia, going back 30,000, 80,000 years prior? The cycles. What reason are we here right now is the question. Everybody's come to join the game for some reason. Like, what side do you sit on? And since you've chosen to come here, how are you able to make the effect and then survive through the change? That's more the question. It's more of a two-part question, but I don't have the answer, because everybody's not ready. I'm trying to be the watcher out here myself as my own little kind of, you know, just mile of the river, of the Mississippi River, like a boat captain. I understand this mile of the entire Mississippi River. That's all I understand. But beware of it. There's this big rock in the middle of this section of the river that I know. So we need to go way around this big rock that's right here. And as your rest of the journey down for the other, 1,200 miles down the river, good luck, because I don't know any of that. But I do know my little mile of the river here. So I think that's the way many of us sit. But I'll leave it back to you on that thought.
Yeah, I was wanting to see what you thought about this. Do you think this is a coincidence, or, are they just messing with people? NASA sparks public panic after accidentally airing an emergency astronaut drill on a live stream that was talking about decompression sickness. And then over here, you got Boeing Starliner stuck on space station as more leaks discovered. And I thought you had told me something about, somebody predicting something about the space
Ed
station.
Dames with the remote viewing. Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So I thought you might. What do you think? Is this all just coincidental that they had a drill, and then you have a similar story over here about the Starliner? What do you think? Sound familiar?
Yeah, it sounds like my very first YouTube video I did with a friend of mine, David Stig Hansen, who is now an explorer. He's gone off to Africa 3 times into the eye of Africa and over to the Rakat structure and different times of formations up in Chad. And he's looking for all these, ancient shorelines and different, megalithic mining operations, etc. So he and I had done a video very, very, very long ago when we both lived in Taiwan. And he was the one who taught me how to do YouTube videos. So thank you, Stig, for, putting me on this journey. But the very, very, very first video I ever did was talking about Ed Dames and the remote viewing crew, who I actually know. And he was saying that before there's a giant solar flare that really knocks back our civilization, that the space station would be evacuated. Now, I personally thought the way he was describing it, it'd be like some kind of meteor shower where they had to get down immediately before the space station got smashed to smithereens. But what you're describing fits that to 100%. That is the catalyst. So they can't see actual times. They can see timelines of events. And the event that he saw was that the space station would be totally evacuated in an emergency fashion. And after that, shortly after that, there was some sort of solar, like X50 or something that would come and beyond Carrington event that was, 10 to 100 times stronger than the Carrington event that would literally wipe half of the planet's technology back and fry and spark an enormous amount of fires. And they would just have not only the actual physical matter from the sun pounding the side of the planet, not a micronova by any means, but something that would run down every wire of every copper wire on the planet into every house and ignite it on fire in every building. That's the type of event he was talking about that preceded, or sorry, the evacuation preceded that event. And I'm really talking like an X50. So, you're describing something that just goes right in that vein of, excited sun that we're seeing now, and then this same thing with the evacuation, possibly, of the space station here. If they come down and they're being forced down, I will absolutely start to be very nervous. That's it, Ransom. You got 1 minute to kick us out of here. What do you think? Are you ready for the next 50? You understand the case.